Malcolm, just
are you prepared to go into the United Nations at this point and ask that charges be brought against the United States for its treatment of American Negroes?
Oh, yes. Number one, of the black man in America is beyond America's ability to solve. It's a human problem, not an American problem or a Negro problem. And as a human problem or a world problem, we feel that it should be taken out of the jurisdiction of the United States government and the United States courts.
We want freedom by any means necessary. We want justice by any means necessary. We want equality by any means necessary. We don't feel that in 1964, living in a country that is supposedly based upon freedom and supposedly the leader of the free world, we don't think that we should have to sit around and wait for some segregationist congressman and senators and a president from Texas in Washington, D.C. to make up their mind that our people are due now some degree of civil rights. No, we want it now, or we don't think anybody should have it.
Uhuru, welcome to We Charge Colonialism, Black August edition. I am Ikemba Ojore, a community organizer and host of We Charge Colonialism Media. Black August is honored every year to commemorate the fallen freedom fighters of the Black Liberation Movement, to call for the release of political prisoners in the United States, to condemn the oppressive conditions of U.S. prisons, and to emphasize the continued importance of the Black liberation struggle. Observers of Black August commit to higher levels of discipline throughout the month. This can include fasting from food and drink, frequent physical exercise and political study, and engagement in political struggle. In short, the principles of Black August are study, fast, train, and fight. During the COVID shutdown, myself with other organizers launched the first Black August Power Hour study by examining George Jackson's Blood in My Eye. We are reviving the Black August Power Hour study with Brother Malcolm X, and we have reached out to organizers within the Black Liberation Movement to participate. We will be meeting every Tuesday and Thursday at 12 p.m. Eastern Time to analyze and discuss the philosophy of Malcolm X. Do join us on YouTube or Facebook for this special commemoration of Black August and Black resistance. Our goal is for organizers within the Black Liberation Movement to unpack Brother Malcolm X's views on colonial capitalism in a contemporary context, to unpack resistance in the movement against colonialism from the lens of Minister Malcolm X. We will be reading select texts and discussing related questions to uplift the historical events that has taken place throughout the month of August. Now, welcome to the Black August Power Hour. Right, peace, family, peace, family. Some of this Lent. Welcome to the Black August Power Hour. We are back, and this is a day after one of the inspirations of Black August. George Jackson was murdered, which was a part of this whole movement to undermine or quell the Black Liberation Movement. George Jackson was a victim of that. But we're here in his rebellious spirit to uplift our comrade, Brother George Jackson, and the many other freedom fighters. Today, we're going to continue to examine Malcolm X's Oxford debate. We're going to pass it over to our organizers who will continue to carry on the tradition of resistance, the fight for liberation. And we're going to examine, analyze, and answer some questions. I want to appreciate everybody always for tuning in. Make sure that you like and share the podcast. And if this is your first time joining us, make sure you subscribe to the channel as well. So I'm going to share my screen now and pass it to Sister Conrad Tone, who's going to lead the reading and discussion of the Oxford debate. And they should be able to hear you now, Tone.
Okay. Greetings, everyone. We hope everyone's Black August is going as planned. People are studying, training, they're meditating. Those who are fasting, peace be upon you all. Today, as Ikemba described, we're going to be reading the Oxford debate, which happened December 3rd, well, this one in particular, 1964. And we're going to kick it over to Brother Khalid, who will be leading the reading today. So, Brother Khalid, whenever you're ready, please go ahead.
Thank you all for the opportunity to share Malcolm's thoughts and ideas. I'll begin. Mr. Chairman, tonight is the first night that I have ever had opportunity to be as near to conservatives as I am. And the speaker who preceded me, first, I want to thank you for the invitation to come here to the Oxford Union. The speaker who preceded me is one of the best excuses that I know to prove our point concerning the necessity, sometimes, of extremism in defense of liberty, why it is no vice, and why moderation in the pursuit of justice is no virtue. I don't say that about him personally, but that type, he's right. X is not my real name. But if you study history, you'll find why no black man in the Western Hemisphere knows his real name. Some of his ancestors kidnapped our ancestors from Africa and took us into the Western Hemisphere and sold us there. And our names were stripped from us. And so today we don't know who we really are. I am one of those who admit it. And so I just put X up there to keep from wearing his name. And as far as this apartheid charge that he attributed to me is concerned, evidently he has been misinformed. I don't believe in any form of apartheid. I don't believe in any form of segregation. I don't believe in any form of racialism. But at the same time, I don't endorse a person as being right just because his skin is white. And oftentimes when you find people like this, I mean that type, when a man whom they have been taught is below them has the nerve or firmness to question some of their philosophy or some of their conclusions, usually they put that label on us, a label that is only designed to project an image which the public will find distasteful. I am a Muslim. If there is something wrong with that, then I stand condemned. Our religion, it's Islam. I believe in Allah. I believe in Muhammad is the apostle of Allah. I believe in brotherhood of all men, but I don't believe in brotherhood with anybody who's not ready to practice brotherhood with our people. I just take time to make these few things clear because I find that one of the tricks of the West, and I imagine my good friend, or rather that type from the West, one of the tricks of the West is to use or create images. They create images of a person who doesn't go along with their views. And then they make certain that this image is distasteful. And then anything that that person has to say from there on in, is rejected. And this is a policy that has been practiced pretty well, pretty much by the West. It perhaps would have been practiced by others had they been in power, but during recent centuries, the West has been in power. They have created the images, and they've used these images quite skillfully and quite successfully. That's why today we need a little extremism in order to straighten a very nasty situation out, or very extremely nasty situation out. I think the only way one can really determine whether extremism in the defense of liberty is justified is not to approach it as an American or a European or an African or an Asian, but as a human being. If we look upon it as different types, immediately we begin to think in terms of extremism being good for one and bad for another, or bad for one and good for another. But if we look upon it ourselves as human beings, I doubt that anyone will deny that extremism in defense of liberty, the liberty of any human being, is a value. Anytime anyone is enslaved or in any way deprived of his liberty, he is justified could you please scroll back? whatever methods necessary to bring about this liberty again. But most people usually think in terms of extremism as something that is relative, related to someone they know or something that they've heard of. I don't think they look upon extremism by itself or all alone. They apply it to something. A good example, and one of the reasons that this can't be too well understood today, many people who have been in positions of power in the past don't realize that the centers of power are changing. When you're in a position of power for a long time, you get used to using your yardstick. And you take it for granted that because you forced your yardstick on others, that everyone is still using the same yardstick. So that your definition of extremism usually applies to everyone. But nowadays, times are changing and the center of power is changing. People in the past who weren't in a position to have a yardstick or use a yardstick of their own are using their own yardstick now. You use one, and they use another. In the past, when the oppressor had one stick and the oppressed used that same stick. Today, the oppressed are sort of shaking the shackles and getting yardsticks of their own. So when they say extremism, they don't mean what you do. And when you say extremism, you don't mean what they do. There are entirely two different meanings. And when this is understood, I think you can better understand why those who are using methods of extremism are being driven to them. A good example is the Congo. When the people who are in power want to, again, create an image to justify something that's bad, they use the press. And they'll use the press to create a humanitarian image for a devil or a devil image for a humanitarian. They'll take a person who's a victim of the crime and make it appear he's the criminal. And they'll take the criminal and make it appear that he's the victim of the crime. And the Congo situation is one of the best examples that I can cite right now to point this out. The Congo situation is a nasty example of how a country, because it is in power, can take its press and make the world accept something that's absolutely criminal. They take pilots that they say are American trained, and this automatically lends respectability to them, and then they will call them anti-Castro Cubans. That's supposed to add to their respectability and eliminate that fact that they're dropping bombs on villages where they have no defense whatsoever against such planes, blowing to bits Black women, Congolese women, Congolese children, Congolese babies. This is extremism. But it is never referred to as extremism because it is endorsed by the West. It is financed by America, is made respectable by America, and that kind of extremism is never labeled as extremism because it's not extremism in defense of liberty. And if it is extremism in defense of liberty, as this type just pointed out, it is extremism in defense of liberty for the wrong type of people. I'm not advocating that kind of extremism. That's cold-blooded murder. But the press is used to making that cold-blooded murder appear as an act of humanitarianism. They take it one step further and get a man named Deshambi, who is a murderer. They refer to him as the premier or prime minister of the Congo to lend respectability to him. He's actually the murderer of the rightful prime minister of the Congo. They never mentioned this. I'm not for extremism in defense of that kind of liberty or that kind of activity. They take this man who's a murderer, and the world recognizes him as a murderer, but they make him the prime minister. He becomes a paid murderer, a paid killer, who is propped up by American dollars. And to show the degree to which he is a paid killer, the first thing he does is go to South Africa and hire more killers and bring them into the Congo. They give them the glorious name of mercenary, which means they hired a killer, not someone that is killing for some kind of patriotism or some kind of ideal, but a man who is a paid killer, a hired killer. And one of the leaders of them is right from this country here, and he's glorified as a soldier of fortune. When he's shooting down little black women and black babies and black children, I'm not for that sort or that type or kind of extremism. I'm for the kind of extremism that those who are being destroyed by those bombs and destroyed by those hired killers are able to put forth to thwart it. They will risk their lives at any cost. They will sacrifice their lives at any cost against that kind of criminal activity. I am for the kind of extremism that the freedom fighters in the Stanleyville regime are able to display against these hired killers who are actually using some of my tax dollars, which I have to pay up in the United States to finance that operation over there. We're not for that kind of extremism. Now, again, I think you must point out that one of those who are very much involved as accessories to the crime is the press. Not so much your press, but the American press, which has tricked your press into repeating what they have invented. But I was reading in one of the English papers this morning, I think it's a paper called The Express, and they gave a very clear account of the type of criminal activity that has been carried on by the mercenaries that are being paid by the United States tax dollars. And it showed where they were killing Congolese, whether they were from the central government or the Stanleyville government. It didn't make any difference to them. They just killed them. And they had it fixed where those who had been processed had to wear a white bandage around their head. And any Congolese that they saw without their white bandage, they killed them. And this is clearly pointed out. And at the beginning of last week, there would have been an outcry, and no one would have allowed Belgium and the United States and the others who are in cahoots with each other to carry on the criminal activity that they did in the Congo, which I doubt anyone in the world, even here at Oxford, will accept, not even my friend. Questionnaire 1. What exactly sort of extremism would you consider the killing of missionaries? Malcolm X responds, I would call it the kind of extremism that was involved when America dropped a bomb on Hiroshima and killed 80,000 or over 80,000 people, men, women, children, everything. It was an act of war. I call it the same kind of extremism that happened when England dropped bombs on German cities and Germans dropped bombs on English cities. It was an act of war. And the Congo situation is war. And when you call it war, then anybody that dies, they die a death that is justified. But those who are in the Stanleyville regime.
Thank you, Brother Khaled. We're going to stop there.
All right, peace. Appreciate you taking on the reading. And at this point, we're going to dive into some questions. Appreciate everybody for tuning in. Continue to share the podcast. We just got finished reading the Oxford debate that was conducted on, it was at December the 3rd, 1964, when Malcolm was wiping the floor with the face of his opponent. And so we can go right into the questions. I think the way that we left off too, I know we're going to dive into it, but Malcolm was like really highlighting how there's one set of rules for the colonizer and another set of rules for African people. So yeah, let's get into it.
Absolutely. So while we're thinking about what we've just heard, and thank you, Brother Khaled, for that reading, Malcolm raised a lot of points and kind of conceptualized a lot of notions, one being like the yardstick. And as Brother Ikemba just shared, he's also describing the different standards, the different rules of engagement for the colonizer and the oppressed. So our first question is going to come from kind of last week, but bringing it into this new context of what examples do we have today of the media projecting a negative image of those who do not go along with the views of the ruling class. So again, what examples do we have today of the media projecting a negative image of those who do not go along with the views of the ruling class? And if you want to put yourself in stack, feel free. That is our first question.
I think like what's going on down in Atlanta with Cop City is an example. Something. This is something close to home, and I know there's some international examples that we can give. But the protesters, those people who are resisting the building of this military. What do we call it? Compound, a city, or whatever you want to call it. Uh, those people who are resisting that are being painted as what, extremists, radicals. They're being painted in a negative light, and it's important that we recognize that, because once they do that, it opens the door for them to be treated in whatever way the state feels fit. And so the state can do things against their own constitution and own laws, right? They can be extreme in a sense in the way that they respond to the people who are resisting this cop city, because of the way that the protesters are being painted, or those people who are fighting against the establishment of this cop city. And it reminds me of something Dr. Amerson Wilson talked about in the way that the colonizers, these Europeans, treated the Native Americans, and how they had to paint them as savages so that they could treat them savagely. But I think that could be an example, and we can see some things happen internationally as well, especially as it pertains to African people fighting for resistance.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, Akimba. And I will also add the vilification of the Black Panther Party. We see how the contradiction of how many political prisoners from the Black Power movement were members of the Panthers. But just yesterday, actually 2 days ago, on Sunday, we see that on 122nd Street and Adam Clayton Powell, they just revealed the Black Panther Party way. Naming a street after a group that is like today being vilified and incarcerated. I see Brother Khalid on stack. Please feel free to offer your submission.
Yeah, I think that what Malcolm had to say then is still very relevant today in general, but I think we need to be much more nuanced in terms of our analysis, because today a lot of the media portrayal, whether it's disinformation or misinformation, is actually not directed towards any type of Black liberation movement, because we're so disconnected from our own people. It's the people. We don't really have a movement. We don't even really have a civil rights movement anymore. So most of the media disinformation is actually the result of internal conflict within the ruling class. So we have one set of media that is, just to make it plain and easy to understand, we have one set of media that is basically Democratic Party, pro-Democratic Party. We have another set of media that is mostly pro-Republican Party. And so they just go at it. And they use everybody else in between. They use the struggles of our people, Black people, African people, new African people. They use our everyday struggles just as weapons to fight their own internal battles in terms of what segment of the ruling class is going to have the ultimate say-so as far as how the empire should be managed. But we're really not that important. 60 years ago we were. We're really not that important now. And also because most of the folks within what we think of as movements are basically just people who react. They react to the latest shooting. They react to the latest injustice. But we don't really have a very formulated view of what it is, again, we're fighting for. We have a laundry list of things we're fighting against. And then so we contrast that with 60, 75 years ago, where throughout the African diaspora, throughout the continent, people were fighting against colonialism. They were fighting against European imperialism. They were fighting for their freedom as well. They were fighting for self-determination. They were waging national liberation struggles. We were doing the same thing here in various degrees, whether it was the civil rights movement, the Black Power movement, then later on the Black liberation movement. We're not doing those kind of things anymore. Many of us don't even use that type of language. That language is not very commonplace or widespread within our communities and neighborhoods. Most of the leaders that our people look to are basically nonprofit managerial people, right? From the nonprofit industrial complex. We talk about struggle, but we don't have the leadership to lead that struggle forward. They sit on the sideline, they commentary, but I'll just make a quick point. A couple of weeks ago, I'm sure many of you are aware of the rumble that happened down in Montgomery, Alabama, where there was a fight that broke out. A Black security guard had been attacked by the white guy, and then other white people came to beat up the Black security guard. Then the Black people around, his co-workers and other people, responded, and they did what they had to do. That's the Black working class. That's the Black lumpen. That's the Black students, like the 15, 16-year-old kid who swam across the river to help. Or like the dudes from the hood who jumped on the boat after the white guys when the white guys was trying to retreat. They like, you can't retreat. We're going to whoop you behind, right? That's the people, not no academics, nonprofit professional managerial people, not professional civil rights people. None of those people were there. They wasn't doing no swinging. That was real Black people taking the swings and get some justice, right? That's how it should be. And we have to get back into that. We have to get back into understanding that it's a real movement. We all have a role to play. And we got to stop letting the powers that be determine those roles for us, which ultimately, as we can see today, is resulted in a mushroom, no, not even a mushroom, an ice cream type of movement. So I'm going to just leave it like that.
Thank you for that, Brother Khaled. That's actually an excellent segue to the next question, which is, why does Malcolm say that we should look... Oh, go ahead.
I know we want to get to the next question, but I kind of had a different perspective because I think today we still see the media portray the movement in a negative way, especially like when at times of heightened contradiction where the masses of African people see that, hold on, something is wrong, fundamentally wrong with the system, and we need some sort of revolution or change, reform, or whatever level, because the Black Lives Matter movement, regardless of what people think about the movement and what has been done, just remember how the media always portrayed the Black Lives Matter movement, and even people who was on the ground who might not have even been affiliated or a part of that movement, they will automatically get sort of clumped into or merged in with the Black Lives Matter movement that was already painted or being painted in a negative way. So now the whole movement, regardless of whether you're part of the organization or not, if you was out in the streets rebelling against state violence, you were looked at in a particular way. And the colonial question was never brought up in the media. It was always the way that we responded. It was always extreme. Look at burning down this and burning down, that, their own neighborhoods. So I think like the media, like that issue with the media is still relevant even to this day. And the only way I would agree, like this, the movement, maybe it is I don't want to take up too much time. It may be a little different, but I think like what happened after Trayvon and Mike Brown, I think is an example of how the media continues to try to control our movement. And that I had another thought, but I'm gonna leave it. I won't take up too much.
No, thank you for that addition, Kemba. And I think similarly that segues really nicely into the next question, which is around why does Malcolm say that we should look at the justification of extremism from the lens of a human being rather than an African, Asian, etc. both you and Brother Khalid kind of raised examples of where people were either responding or reacting to circumstances of oppression. So for those who are just kind of in the audience and also those on the call thinking, why does Malcolm say that we should look at the justification of extremism from the lens of a human being rather than an African, Asian, etc.?
And that part, what page was that on? Because that was a point.
While you look for the page, and I can find this too, we have balance stack, then cycle. Go ahead, Val.
Peace, y'all. So Kimba is on page 83.
Okay, thank you. I found it.
Sorry, y'all, for my alarm. So what Malcolm was saying was that if we don't look at it from a lens of a human being, then people have the right to say, "Oh, it's okay for them to fight back or be violent, but this group of people cannot be violent." As an example, going to your point, Tone, about the Black Panther Party and the Black Liberation Army, you know, they're portrayed by the media as terrorists and criminals, right? Because resistance is always criminalized. Our resistance, Black resistance, is criminalized. So when we look at political prisoners who have been incarcerated for decades, right, and they're eligible for parole, as an example, you know, the parole, the PBA, they come out, you know, and you know, press conferences and the media vilifying our freedom fighters who have fought for our liberation and say, hey, they can't be released because they killed the police officer. However, police officers, for some reason, believe that, you know, they have a different level of, you know, we should, they're more important than other people. So it's okay that cops kill human beings all the time and they get no time. However, when we fight back and defend ourselves, we should stay in prison for the rest of our lives. So what Malcolm was saying was that just like we have the right to defend ourselves, and you know, and they believe that they have the right to perpetrate violence against us, we have the right to defend ourselves. And if we look at it from a human being aspect, then people all over the world wouldn't look at it like, well, you know, when we fight back, it's an issue. But when, you know, when other, you know, the powers that be, you know, perpetrate violence, it's okay. So I think that's what Malcolm was saying, how if we look at it from that position, then we know that we all have the right to defend ourselves.
Hmm.
Thank you for that, Val. I know you can, but you want to just make reference to the page 43, but cycle is on stack, and then you will go after if you still want to share. Next.
Yeah, kind of just want just read it again swiftly. I think the only way one can really determine whether extremism in the defense of liberty is justified is not to approach it as an American or a European or an African or an Asian, but as a human being. If we look upon it as different types immediately, we begin to think in terms of extremism being good for one and bad for another, or bad for one and good for another. But if we look upon it ourselves as human beings, I doubt that anyone will deny that extremism in defense of liberty, the liberty of any human being, is of value. Anytime anyone is enslaved or in any way deprived of his liberty, if that person is a human being, as far as I am concerned, he is justified to resort to whatever methods necessary to bring about his liberty again. And as Malcolm would say, you know, well, he didn't coin it, but what's good for the goose is good for the gander.
Beautifully. Thank you so much for rereading that too, because it definitely like brought it back to the forefront of my mind. I feel like he kind of explained it. Sorry, y'all. But he kind of like alluded to why he said it, right? Like when you look at extremism in defense as people like reacting with the empathy that humans all have, you start to like, you literally pave a way that like that defense is automatically justifiable, right? Like if somebody is committing a truly evil deed against another person, period, everybody feels that, regardless of the reason that is happening. And now that reason, I mean, and now whatever media tricks that people would try to do, all that they would really be thinking is that like, yo, as a human, as an empathetic person, I would react the same way. And we should. We definitely should.
Thank you for that, Valley Kimba and Psycho. Very valid points that are being made. And this comes straight out of 484 for those looking for it on the next page. The next question is, what parallels can be drawn with what happened in the Congo and what is happening now in Niger? So again, what parallels can be drawn with what is happening in the Congo and what is happening?
Hey, Tom.
Yep.
Can you hear me?
Yes, Brother Dilo, go ahead.
If I may, I'm in the car right now, so I can't see all my prompts and stuff, but icon stuff. So I would like to just share another or a broader understanding of Malcolm's position regarding humanity. Right? We know that in the Islam, that for many who knows about the Islam, that we believe in a brotherhood already online. You heard about talk about brotherhood that's online. We also understand the universal humanity. Right, and I think that beyond the political ideal, right, I think Malcolm and High Police Staff is also bringing to people's attention our moral responsibility in terms of our human existence, and therefore he recognizes that we are, in essence, all human. All right, and therefore everything else outside of that being human is a construct in terms of race, class, and etc. And so his feeling, as Brother already mentioned, what is good for the goose is good for the gander. Because essentially, we can universally, we're all the same. Thank you.
That's a good point, Brother Jalil. And absolutely, this looks like deductive logic, right? So it's another way of looking at how you are both describing that. Thank you for that, Brother Jalil and Psycho. I'm wondering if anyone has any response to that third question around the parallels between the Congo and Niger. And again, that's on page 484. I see Brother Khalid is on stack. And for anyone else, please put yourself on stack. Go ahead, Brother Khalid.
Yeah, quickly. I think that there are some parallels, but again, I think we need to modernize Malcolm's comments and look at them within a context in which we currently live. And so with Niger, we're dealing with a situation that speaks to almost a universality throughout the African continent and probably throughout most of the African diaspora, and certainly here within what we call the United States of America. And that's the emergence and the dominance of neocolonialism and its impact and its utility over controlling any type of mass movement for Black freedom or Black liberation. And so we look at Niger, we see people struggling, man, to shake off the shackles of not just the European dominance, but the dominance of the Europeans through their own people, right? And how they've taken it to another level. And it is a level of armed struggle and armed resistance to neocolonialism. We haven't got to that point here within the United States, but it probably will require that we get to that point, even if on a small level, we just, overturn some of these city councils and we push to the side some of these mayors and some of these state representatives and county leaders who we know don't really represent the interests of our people, but they come from amongst us. I think that is one of the starking parallels between what Malcolm described then with the Congo and what is happening with Niger, and as it applies to our local communities throughout the United States of America. I'd like to go back quickly because I definitely agree with what Brother Jalil was saying, In the Quran, one of the passages, it says, quote, well, kind of paraphrase, I'm not going to quote, don't let the hatred of the people stop you from doing justice. And basically, don't let the hatred of the people who've done you injustice and oppression stop you from doing justice by them when you have an opportunity to do so, i.e., when you have authority and you have power. And I think Malcolm, in speaking to an international audience, when I say an international audience, an audience of people outside of the United States, he wanted to humanize the struggle of the Black folks throughout the world, but especially the Black folks that he was referring to in the Congo. And he wanted to point out that this is a universal struggle. And if we have a tendency to just look at it strictly through the lens of our nationality or our so-called race, then we're going to always see the other as being the enemy and not being justified in protecting themselves and defending their interests. But when we look at it in a universal way as human beings, keep in mind he was speaking to mostly white people in England, that we can see the justification for people taking up arms to protect themselves. But going back to the other thing, the parallels, those are the parallels that I would look at. Again, I've said this again, and I will continue to echo it. Here within the United States of America, the greatest threat to any genuine Black liberation movement is neocolonialism. And especially the neocolonialism that's put forth by a neoliberal type of party like the Democrats or the moderate elements within the Republican Party. It's dangerous. It clouds the issues. It mystifies who the enemies and adversaries really are, and it confuses our people.
Thank you for that, Brother Thomas. I see Kumba's on staff. Please go ahead.
Yeah, I appreciate this discussion. It's very important. So looking at that segment of the Oxford debate that we just looked at and going back and forth. So if you study dialectics, you'll see that Malcolm actually gave us a great breakdown of what dialectical materialism is, and from a historical perspective as well. So the reason he's saying these extremism isn't particular to like Africa or Asia, it's the same thing as to say that so there is no such thing as African socialism. There is no such thing as Chinese socialism. Socialism just is as it is, stands on its own merit, and you use it that way. So the extremist position that he put forward was, we want to be extreme. Okay, so you extremely burn us down and burn out our house, so we're going to extremely cut off your head, so we're going to do that type of thing, if that's what we need to do. Just give that an example. But, so that's what I really was picking up on, that his whole understanding of what the dialectical process is and it was at that time. I think that's essentially what I'm trying to do. The other thing is, I think that when we talk about how the movement has shifted, and we do know that the movement in the United States and worldwide actually has shifted from a large degree from where it was before. And I know that we do have, what I do know that we got leadership in the community, different movements, for example, we got the movement. But one thing that I want to say clearly is that in all the years that I've watched people and movements and organizations, there's always a level of apprehension to join this pole or that pole because someone says that they got it better, or there's an ideological difference. There may be some class difference. And so everybody may not get on board with it, but we do have those agencies that are out there that have been out there who have been making pavements and paving the way and improving the community, the movement that I just spoke of, and things of that nature. And we can see the tangibility of it. We can see the influence that they have had in the community in the United States and worldwide. But there's still this reluctance, or there's some maybe lack of political education, or not understanding, or disagreement, fundamental disagreement, and that could be the case. And we accept that because that's also part of the, that's also part with the laws of dialectics. But it's all a learning process. But you also have to get in mind that we got to remember that once we take some of our, and I'm gonna say it like this, and I know it can cause a lot of pain and things like that. But sometimes you got to just take the individual self out of it and see what the greater good is, and understand what the greater good is presenting. And once it's presented, if you disagree with that, then there's something fundamentally wrong on your level. not with the greater good, because what's wrong with building up a particular community, making the housing structure better, making businesses better, and things of that nature, and pushing this whole issue of colonialism. My brother said the greatest threat to the world. I don't want to put words in nobody's mouth, but he said greatest threat is colonialism. Of course, we know imperialism is even a greater threat than that. The whole colonial apparatus is still intact on a certain level, settler colonialism. So, what white power structure is in the world is still is still the greatest threat, because it can go and influence the handkerchief head Negro on the continent of Africa or anywhere else he or she may be, and rip all the resources about that land. You see, so I don't know. There's some consternation on my part there, and there could be some debate. I know you don't really have time to deal with that right now, but I did want to put that out there, and did want to kind of make it if we're going back to this whole identity question, I'll wait for that. But that was all I wanted to say on that particular point.
Thank you, Brother Kudo. Appreciate your input. And our final question for today, before we wrap.
Somebody raised this question in the chat. I mean, if, like 30 seconds, maybe somebody can answer real quick. He said, all indications suggest the events in Niger are more related to a revolution, not a coup. Does anybody have any quick thoughts on that?
I didn't see that. What was the question again?
All indications suggest the events in Niger are more related to a revolution, not a coup. Does anybody have any thoughts on that? What do y'all think?
Yeah, I think if anything, it would be a revolutionary coup. And I'm not sure if it's going to follow the road that Thomas Sankara was leading and paving the way. But to me, it seems more or less on that type of line. There needs to be some more work there. We know not a lot of discussion to be had right about now, but yeah, there needs to be a little bit more discussion on that. That's a serious conversation almost by itself.
Quickly, I'm not on the ground in Niger, but just based on what I'm able to gather through different media, it seems as if the coup is an expression of a revolutionary process that is taking shape and taking place, not just within Niger, but amongst different nation states throughout the African continent to shake off as best people can some of the continued footprint of European or Euro-American imperialism and neocolonialism again. So I think the coup is just an expression of that it seems to be a groundswell of not opposition, but support for the coup. And to me, that's an indication that the coup is just more symbolic, that it's the revolutionary stuff that's really going to take on more character. Going back to the comment that the brother made, neocolonialism, and I made a note, and I'll just leave it like this. Neocolonialism is one of the last exhaustive aspects of imperialism. When, say, European imperialism, when they know they can't come at you directly, then they get your own to come at you indirectly. And that's one of the last things that they will do. And so I just leave it like that. And my comment was that neocolonialism represents the greatest threat to any genuine Black freedom or Black liberation movement here within the United States. I don't know whether or not that holds true for throughout the African diaspora or throughout other marginalized places of color or class.
Okay. Thank you for that. And the final question on this subject will be around what should we, Africans, organizers, justice-minded people, freedom fighters, respond to what's happening in Niger? So what should we respond to? How should we respond? Excuse me, to what's happening in Niger?
Lord. I think we need to respond with support as much as we can, but I think we need to qualify that support with a lot more research. So, for myself, I can't speak for everyone, but just speaking for myself and speaking for the group that I directly represent, which is the NAIP, we need to do more research and more study before we can be more definitive about the next steps. And this is a criticism I'm going to throw out. I think we need to be more concerned about the linkage between what we can do, not just for Nigeria, what can we do for those people down in Montgomery, Alabama? Because to me, that symbolizes a pushback against neocolonialism as well. And it certainly symbolizes a pushback against white supremacy, especially when you think about the historical role that Montgomery has played even before the civil rights movement, even before the Montgomery bus boycott, right? Let's go all the way back. And I'm learning more about it centuries and centuries ago in terms of the slave ports and all that other stuff. In fact, they just got their first black mayor after all these years. And the fact that I think a couple of days before the Rumble jumped off, Trump was in town speaking to large crowds of white folk. So I'm saying, to me, let's look at the connection between Nigeria and Montgomery, Alabama. What does that mean? What does that mean for Africans there and Africans here?
Excuse me. I see Brother Jalil wrote a coup is the military seizing power, not necessarily in support of the oppressed. Revolutions are the people rising to seize power. Brother Jalil, we can give you the final word if you want to say a quick note.
Thank you, Mike. Thanks. Couple of things I want to say in regards to what has been shared here. Right. One is this here. Yes, you're absolutely correct, brother. We need to direct some attention and support for our comrades and brothers and sisters down in Montgomery. But in also doing, we need to be able to present the ideals and the goals and objectives of national liberation and independence. Unfortunately, our movement is not solid or consolidated on the ideological or political objectives as to what it is that we're seeking to achieve. For me, as Al-Haj Malik Shabazz instructed us, revolutions are fought for land. And for us, based upon the history of this country, subject to the Emancipation Proclamation, Field Order Number 15, and the building of freedom bureaus, the exodus out of the land that we was at that time was liberated territory. I think that the offer of 40 acres in the mule, I think all of this tied in and shares with us or informs us that our goals need to be one for national liberation and independence and seizing the land. And so for me, there is no longer a debate on the issue. Not for me, maybe for others, on the issues of what the goals and objectives are. Our goals and objectives, in my opinion, is to balkanize this country, establish our sovereignty based upon international law and in our relationship we have with the international community to build our own nation. So that's, that I like to just bring that out there as part of this discussion in terms of what Al-Haj Malik Shabazz talked about in regards to the ideals of what it means to seize power, to have power, and to oppose those who oppose us. In this instance, we know the Frantz Fanon and Wretched Earth and Black Skin White Mask and Dying Colonialism told us that engaging in violence for us can in fact be liberatory. It frees us to the ideas of being empowered, to ideas of being powered, right? Being not empowered to ideas of being empowered. And so for us, we need to recognize that violence used judiciously, particularly in regards to self-defense, is critical. We need to be able to organize ourselves in a capacity where we can defend ourselves, as Al-Haj Malik Shabazz told us, by any means necessary.
Thank you for that, brothers Khalid and Jalil, for that submission. And we are at time, so we're going to stop this discussion here, but it can continue in the chat. Thank you for those who came out. Thank you for those who read. Thank you for the organizers on this call. We hope that this is really influencing and impacting the way you show up and how you organize. We will circle back on Thursday as we continue on this journey of honoring Black August and commemorating those freedom fighters who risked the most, right, to afford liberation. We want to just remind folks of the principles of Black August. Please make sure you are studying, go back to these study sessions, and continue to engage us as we round up. We have 2 more sessions to go, Thursday and, it's Tuesday, and then next week, Thursday and next week, Tuesday. So we want to welcome you back as we unpack Message to the Grassroots. which is one of Malcolm's very inspirational and impactful speeches, and what caused a lot of folks to kind of look at the movement very differently. So we want to bid you folks adieu for today. Go in peace, and we'll welcome you back on Thursday as we continue the study. Thank you all.